All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 99. It's Thursday night. We're going to have a return guest, actually, our first return guest. We're going to be talking about HBCU football with Stephen J. Gaither. He founded HBCU Gameday in 2012. It's a website and a Twitter account that we enjoy a lot. And when he created it back, 10 years ago, was an effort to create an outlet that offered, authentic and in-depth coverage of HBCU sports and culture and to create more journalistic content. It's since then it's expanded and had a solid stable of writers and contributors as well as podcasts and video content. In fact, I just saw our guest in the audience. I'm going to go ahead and let him up. So, obviously, HBCU football's been around for a long time. 1892 was the first black intercollegiate football game played between what's now Johnson C. Smith and Livingstone, who are still playing again now. Gaither's a Williams-Salem State alum himself. We talked about it last time, but I wanted to welcome all of you to come and join us. We'd love to hear from you as well as we go ahead and fire this up. Hey, Stephen, how are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing well. How about yourself, sir?
Doing well. It's been an exciting season so far, and we're happy to have you back as our first return guest.
Oh wow, I'm honored to be the first one you liked enough to bring back. So that's good. I'll take that.
Absolutely. Well, I enjoyed our conversation last time. It was a great one, and we had a lot of good audience participation then, and I enjoyed it, especially as we got rolling. It was kind of funny how that kind of slow rolled out as we are sort of going through and first laying a lot of groundwork. For
Right.
those who might not be as familiar with the site, because we did the last one back in August before the season even really began. Tell folks, what is HBCU Gameday?
Yeah. So HBCU Gameday, we are a multi-tiered digital platform covering HBCU sports and culture. Um, Started it back a decade ago, back in 2012. Just a blog covering HBCUs in the area and nationally. And since then it's grown, and the staff has grown. My partners, Tally Carr and Wally Pitt, have come in and help really take this to the next level, and so many other people as well. So I'm just happy to be the fire starter there. As we're rolling into, gosh, this is our 10th year. God, with the COVID year, I would know it would usually be 11 seasons, but maybe it's 10. So just really excited. We have not only the website, but also we have multimedia shows. Our No Huddle show, which started off just kind of us doing it weekly as we were going out to games and connecting, is now we have a sponsor in Nissan. So big shout out to them. It's also a television show. We're producing content with some of the conferences as well. So just a lot going on, so many directions, and man, we're just elated to be a part of this, covering this HBCU movement, and the growth that we've seen over the past decade is amazing. So really excited.
Absolutely. And I've enjoyed reading your site for years now. And again, just as a quick invite, anyone wants to join in, we welcome you to the conversation. Just hit request. One thing where we're at now in the season, it's homecoming season. Could you explain, for those who might not know, how big a deal that is to HBCU culture?
Yeah, honestly, it's a little bit of a sore spot for me right now because we didn't actually have our homecoming football game, but that's another story.
Oh, yes. That's like the second year in a row.
Yeah, well, it's yeah, so two out of three. But anyway, homecoming is a great time, because it gives folks a chance to come home. HBCUs are a place for folks who've been there, and not just the black folks that have attended, but also I believe just everyone who's attended and been there. It's really a family culture for the most part, and people are it's a special time in your life, so you get to come back and relive your undergrad days if you'd like to, or just connect with people and see how they're doing now and seeing everyone's progression and things like that. So it's an amazing time. Folks, some of the biggest attendance numbers in the FCS and Division II will come out of homecoming games. And so, yeah, it's just a major time, and it's multiple days of festivals. Even though we didn't at Winston-Salem State, we didn't have our homecoming game. People were in town and still had parties and connected and things like that. So it's really something that you just kind of have to experience. and then there's everybody's individual experience and the collective experience as well. So I'm just really excited. It's a great time of the year. October into November is it's my favorite time of the year. I wish sometimes we could just bottle it up and share it for the rest of the year, but so we have to treasure it while we have it.
What for yourself? I mean, obviously, as you said, it's a sore subject because of the way Winston-Salem State's been kind of hosed a couple of years in a row on how it was going to be scheduled. But assuming it's going on normally, what are your favorite parts of homecoming at Winston-Salem State, being an alum?
Well, I'll say, we have Return to the Yard, so that gives our alumni a chance to connect with the current students, and we'll usually have like a live music. We'll have we'll usually have live music. We'll have the band, of course, and then there's the game, the tailgating, and just the various ways to connect with people socially in person. We see each other all the time on social media, but it's a little bit different when you get a chance to just connect in person, even if it's just a 2 minute, hey, how you doing, handshake, hug, and good to see you, and it kind of can lift your spirits. I know. So it's a great time, and just experiencing other folks' homecoming, the same thing as well. So it's an amazing, one of a kind feeling, and just everybody, no matter if you went to school there or not, if you go to a school on a homecoming, you're probably going to feel like you're at home. So it's an amazing thing for anybody to experience.
I saw in the article that you guys published about the upcoming game. Campbell's heading out to play. They're the homecoming opponent again. They were Jackson State's homecoming opponent. Now they're going to be North Carolina A&T's homecoming opponent. And then Coach Mike Minter said he's going to rank which one was better. Did I read that right? Or
yeah, Campbell has an interesting schedule this year. So they were at Jackson State's homecoming, which was 52,000 people. And Campbell plays in a
the crowd
stadium
was
that's
crazy for that game.
God, what are they? The fifth? They're 5,000. They seat 5,000 down there in Bowie's Creek. So the biggest stadium they've ever played in. Their SID told us. And then they turn around this week and they get a chance to play North Carolina A&T. Who's their stadium is seats over 21K, and there'll be probably 40,000 people in the area at some point in time. So it's just an amazing atmosphere as well. And then it's also a Big South game for them, and then going forward, it'll be a CAA game for both teams. So, Campbell's getting a little baptism in HBCU. They've also played North Carolina Central at home, and then they'll travel to finish up the season, I think, at Delaware State. So, it's been fun. Mike Minter really embraced playing against Jackson State and Coach Prime. And those folks were really, they were, it was a tough game against the number 5 team in the country now. They came out on the losing side of it, but they're hoping that they can, compete with A&T. Both of those teams were expected to be 1 and 2 in the Big South. So it's going to be a great time. I won't be in Greensboro for it. I'll be down in Jackson for Jackson State Southern, but it's guaranteed to be a great time, and should be a competitive game too. So yeah, then there's the football aspect of homecoming, where some folks are now feeling that it is a insult to be the homecoming opponent, which is also always feeling, but you're hearing a lot of more people talking about it vocally. Homecoming, you generally, again, you're gonna get your biggest crowd, your most alumni. You're gonna want them to feel good about where the program is going. So you usually want to kind of beat up on a cupcake, but a lot of teams this year have, as we say in the HBCU world, have had their homecomings becoming homegoings. Homegoing would be a funeral. Because they've had some tough opponents. So it's been fun. It's just always fun every year to see kind of how things play out. So great extension of what's already a great game.
You brought up something because obviously, North Carolina A&T and Hampton are heading to the Colonial. How are those fan bases, handling?
Are you guys having trouble hearing me?
Oh, I can hear you. Oh, do we have a small technical difficulty? Can you hear me, Stephen? I don't know if folks in the audience can hear me. They probably can, I assume. Oh, looks like he had a technical difficulty. We'll get him back up in a moment. And by the way, as we're getting Stephen back up, any of y'all want to join us, please just hit request. In fact, I now see Stephen. I'm going to add him again. We'd love to have you join us and join this conversation. All right. Let's see here. And it's so funny. There's a time delay on some people's Twitter feeds, the way this kind of works. I learned it. If you ever go live, you'll notice there'll be like a time jump and you'll suddenly like jump into the middle of conversation. Oh, hey, cool. We got someone else coming up. And Steven, I think you're up here too. Feel free to unmute. I know there was kind of a small hiccup there.
Yeah, I'm back. Yeah, sorry about that. Connection's a little wired, but yeah, a great time. Homecoming is a great time, and it's just when you get a great game and you get a great band, and it's there's nothing like it. So we're in the middle of that season as well as playing for championships. So there's a lot on the line, in all of the conferences, particularly the SWAC, as well as at the D2 level, the CIAA and the SIC. So exciting weekend of games we're looking forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like we have someone who joined us up here as well. Herbert L. Seward III. How are you doing?
Hey, how you doing? I'm a HBCU football and culture contributor for HBCU Digital Network. Um, Me and Steve kind of run in the same types of circles when it comes to covering, HBCU athletics, and I think having a space like this tonight is a really cool thing, particularly right around this time of year. Steve's absolutely right. I've, in a lot of the writings I've done, there's not really a more unique game day experience for a fan that isn't used to HBCU sports and culture than HBCU football. Um, Whether it's the SWAC or the MEAC or the SIAC or the CIAA, um, it's a very integrated experience in terms of um, you know, fan participation, fan engagement, you name it. That's what HBCU, football is pretty much all about. If you've ever been to um, a, a really engaged game day environment like the Jackson State or Grambling or any number of schools, you walk into the stadium and you can immediately see the differences than what you would normally see at a more mainstream football fan experience. So if anybody out there ever gets the chance to do it, do it.
Absolutely. One question I had for you, Stephen, I think this is when the audio kind of sort of cut out for you, is you got Hampton in North Carolina, A&T, they're about to join the Colonial Athletic Association. How are their fans handling? Because they've been moving around and bouncing around a little bit, although I'm pretty sure this seems like a pretty solid, destination for those two programs. But how are their fans handling that?
Well, in my observation, I think fans I think fans on both ends are a little weary. There is some optimism. It's a mixed emotion because we'll take Hampton first. Hampton was the first to hop out of the MEAC. Well, they weren't the first to hop out of the MEAC, but they to leave for a predominantly white conference in the Big South, and so that took a lot of folks by storm. And there was a lot of shock there. So they were in the Big South for a couple of years, and then on the football side for sure there was some hesitancy, and we just had a great piece by Chantel Powell, who is a Hampton native. I'm sorry, a Hampton alumna, and she was talking to them about how they feel about it, and I think a lot of folks would, if they had their choices, if you polled alumni, a lot of them would like to go back to the MEAC. But I think of the ones who either don't think that that's going to happen or are okay with them not being in the MEAC, I think they feel like the CAA is a better, more stable conference. But for them, and as well as North Carolina A&T, there are questions as to whether or not they will have how will they have the financial backing to really be there and be successful. When you look at CAA budgets, I mean, even North Carolina A&T, which has had one of the larger HBCU budgets, the CAA budgets are quite larger. A lot of that is due to having more sports and of course more staff. And so, there is some question as to whether or not, for both schools, the financial commitment that's going to be needed for them to be competitive, is that going to be there? And, so it's going to be really interesting. Hampton is in the CAA competing this year now. They do have one win against Albany, and, they've had some other games where they've been, kind of competitive. Hampton is a school, is an interesting program itself. I mean, they went, 50 plus years without winning the championship. in their D2 days and were really, not really competitive for a long time. And then when they decided to ramp up for Division 1, their program went through about a decade where in Division 1 and Division 2 where they were really good. But since then has come down, and they're really more of a basketball school at this point. And so football, even in the MEAC, wasn't really making numbers that would, knock down your socks. They weren't pulling in, FAMU or North Carolina A&T like numbers, even when they were in the MEAC. And so football wise, and so I think some folks lost interest as well when they moved to the Big South. The CAA, it'll be interesting because now you're going to have A&T there. They also, I think one thing that fans, they don't necessarily think about it in this way, but both A&T and Hampton still have home and homes with their big rivals, right? So North Carolina A&T still has been playing South Carolina State, their longtime MEAC rival. Of course, they've got North Carolina Central, their big in-state rival, and then also Norfolk State. And if you think about kind of the way the MEAC was before the breakup, those were kind of some of the schools that may bring a crowd. Outside of that, maybe Florida A&M, but Florida A&M would rarely bring their band, which is a huge draw for them. And so I think they're still able to keep a lot of those ties in the non-conference. And I don't know how glued folks were to games against Delaware State or some schools like that. So I think fans don't like change, especially when it doesn't result in winning. It really gets loud. But I think it'll be interesting to see over the next couple of years if they can become competitive in the CAA, and as time goes on, because they've changed conferences before, and people weren't necessarily happy about that initially. So there's a lot that goes behind all of that, I would say.
Absolutely. Herbert, you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I think the move for both A&T and Hampton to the CAA, from a fan's perspective, I think it's a little bit of a double-edged sword. Strictly speaking of, in terms of football, I think Steve's absolutely right. There are a lot of regional, traditional rivalries that fans are still kind of, wrapping their mind around, not necessarily engaging in on a regular basis like they would normally do. Although, as you stated, there are going to be provisions for, certain rivals, like, for example, A&T, A&T and Hampton, A&T and North Carolina Central, who's in the MEAC. On occasion, A&T and Winston-Salem, his school, but I'm not sure, how feasible that would be from a football perspective when it, comes to scheduling, because the kind of restrictions that, FCS teams might have in terms of scheduling, Division 2 opponents. I think also some other considerations outside of football, probably have to be taken into consideration, particularly for Hampton. In that Hampton Roads region, it's actually, more of a geographical fit for them in terms of the rivals they have in the immediate area, in the Tidewater area, with William and Mary and the like. Norfolk State is still right down the road, so that rivalry is still intact for both football and basketball. So it's it's going to be very interesting to see how those things play out in the CAA for both of those schools. Like I said, I think some of the considerations go beyond football. Basketball is one of those considerations where I think both Hampton and A&T have a real opportunity to to kind of rewrite their own legacy, so to speak, in the conference. But from a football perspective, I think both of them, some people say that, it's going to be a little bit of a learning curve for the team, for both programs. But, I think honestly, both programs have a good deal to bring to the conference from a football perspective. So
That makes sense. Stephen, could you explain, because we've sort of touched lightly on this in conversations in the past, how does for those who aren't familiar, how does the Black College Football National Championship get selected? Is it just a Celebration Bowl now, or is it still kind of a poll among media?
Well, that depends on who you ask, and what year you ask. But in general, again, just the history of it, and we got an article, that was written by Brian Simpkins a while back. The HBCU national title, that whole idea was brought out of the fact that HBCUs weren't able to, weren't a part of the national conversation as far as championships, so the black media had to crown basically their own version of the AP poll, and so that's been around for since 1920, and so throughout that you've had a lot of different, and there have been various and different polls. Some have been more highly regarded than others. So there, it's just like kind of in the AP championship, they'll have you may have some years where there are multiple teams claiming them, and for a long time everybody was kind of lumped together, and then as Division I and Division II kind of congealed and kind of turned into what they have now, there was still the divide as to whether you put them all together, whether you do them separately, and so it's continuing to evolve. And I think there obviously when ESPN decided that they were going to do the Celebration Bowl and they got the MEAC and SWAC champions, I think what they sold them on was making this the national championship game. But again, that didn't take into account a lot of other factors, and so um, generally, the Celebration Bowl champion has been considered at least the Division I HBCU champion. Over the last couple of years, I think last year was the kind of year is one reason I never really got comfortable calling it a national championship game, because it's for a lot of different reasons. So it's MEAC and SWAC, as far as it goes, FCS, they do consider it the national championship game, but again, it depends on who you ask. But yeah, it's definitely, that's where you want to get if you're eligible for it, because I think it is. I prefer it to the FCS playoffs. Having been around it, but I could see why some folks may feel differently.
Right. No, that makes sense. And I can't help but think of, like, Tennessee State. I don't think's ever been a part of a HBCU conferences, has it? I mean, I've always knew it was kind of a bit of a, its path to, through sports. I know they were NAIA. We had that conversation, last time we were here. But and then now, you've got we were just, it came to me as we were talking about, like, the teams that are moving to, like, the Colonial Athletic and where they fit into this. Do they kind of, does that mean they've sort of voluntarily stepped away from qualifying for it just by nature of not being an HBCU conference? It's interesting.
Yeah, in my eyes, I would say it does make it more difficult. It does make it more difficult. Again, that would be the simple thing, is just to say, hey, these two teams won and they're the national champion. But again, when you say HBCU and you don't make a differential, personally, I'm fine with saying D1 and a D2 champ. I think that's fine. But I think if you're only putting HBCU around it, it kind of makes it a little bit different. But that's me, and there are other people that feel that way as well, and some that don't. But I think it's going to be interesting. I think if you ever have a year where Hampton or A&T gets really good in the CAA, they beat all their HBCU opponents, and they make a run in the playoffs. I've always felt like you can't really say that they aren't the champion, especially if they're winning multiple games in a postseason. I just don't really see that when you only have to win one game. But that's me. They don't pay me. Nobody's paying me yet to make those decisions. But and I think in a way it makes it a little bit messier. But for me, I like it. It's it makes things fun. Then you get the arguments as to why and why not, and some of them are better than others. But yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, Herbert, I know you wanted to add something to that.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said about, how we come to that decision in terms of, who a national champion is, and, in terms of HBCU football. One thing that we have to really kind of address, particularly at the FCS levels, that a lot of the Celebration Bowl itself kind of came out because of some of the financial constraints that a lot of us face when we choose to engage in the FCS playoffs, in terms of cost incurred, things of that nature. that's part of the motivation for the Celebration Bowl in general. Particularly for two major conferences. I think ultimately, um, the fact you got A&T and Hampton and Tennessee State that are in non HBCU conferences, I think there's still going to be a real we don't see it yet, but I still think there's going to be a move in the future to really include those teams in that particular structure. How it's going to happen, I'm not too sure. But I think, again, Steve was absolutely right. Depending on who you ask, when you say HBC national champion, it can be all encompassing. Whether we're talking about, um, FCS, HBCUs or the CIAA or the SIAC at the D2 level. And a lot of times, depending on who you ask, or polls you see, you might see those things integrated. But that's purely subjective. Um, I'm cool with the delineation between FCS and D2 or Division One or Division Two for HBCUs. I just think it's something that could be. It's going to have to get clearer, as we go. So, um, but yeah, it's always interesting for us to talk about it because the scenarios are practically endless when it comes to it. So
it reminds us of what the traditional poll system used to be like. We talked about it the other day. It was like FBS, when it used to be the coaches poll and the AP poll were the only decider, and the bowls weren't even that organized, so you had teams that just never played each other. It's for the fun of it, I guess, the subjectiveness of it. I want to just kind of turn a little bit towards D2 football because we've been talking a bit about FCS. The team that surprised me, I keep looking at. We've talked about it before, and we talked about it when we had a D2 show. And actually, I see both the guys who were on the D2 show, Kris and Chuck, in the audience. So, but Virginia Union, they have just been impressing week after week. They had that overtime win over Bowie State a couple weeks ago, but they knocked out Valdosta State. A reigning champion. So it was actually not a reigning champion, but a typical champion contender. What do you make of them?
I think they have been a program the last I guess the last 8 years or so. They've just kind of been like, I wouldn't even say the bridesmaid. They were like they were like the usher. They were like the usher at the wedding. Like they were there. They look cute, but when it came time for business, mostly Bowie State, and then and at times Virginia State have foiled them, even when they're having really good seasons. And so, hey, it's now their time, I believe. I think with Bowie State, obviously, and you talk about the connectivity between the HBCUs and just how the college football business is gone. You look at Bowie. They built a great program under Damon Wilson. They gave him time. And he went from, having an average program to where they were really outstanding and really, really high up there. I often believe that, if the CIAA hadn't been switched to Super Region 2, which is the toughest football region for some reason, while still staying in Super Region 1 for basketball, which is the toughest basketball region, after Winston-Salem State made their run, I think you could have seen them in the national championship game as well, because I think they were that kind of program. But Coach Wilson, Tyrone Wheatley leaves, and they can blame Tyrone Wheatley. Tyrone Wheatley leaves Morgan State, and then Coach Wilson goes over to Morgan State, and Kyle Jackson, goes from being a position coach to being the DC to being the interim head coach in a couple of months, and he's done a really great job. And they had some bumps in the road, but they'll be back as a program, I think, as well. And so Virginia State not quite there yet either with the new head coach, and so Virginia Union kind of keeping that consistency going. They're just there, and the monster that is Jada Byers, man. I had a chance to watch Tariq Cohen for 4 years at North Carolina A&T, the things he did, and in his own way, Jada Byers is kind of that same kind of guy. I mean, he's 5'6", 5'7", soaking wet, but just explosive, and they just keep handing him the ball, and he just keeps taking it. It's like Allen Iverson, just they keep handing him the ball, he keeps taking it in the paint and coming out of there with scores. So, he's really on pace to get 2,000 yards realistically. And so, they've got a mammoth offensive line with some guys that I think are millennials, but hey, that's neither here nor there. Everybody's got to get it how we get it. And a great defense as well. And I think if that passing game can prove adequate, then I think they've got a real chance in a year where Valdosta State isn't Valdosta State to, there's no limit on where they could go once they get into the playoffs. So I think Virginia Union, they just kind of bided their time, and now it's their time. If they get past Chowan this week, God, I hope they get past Chowan. I'm sorry, I said that, but yes.
we won't tell anyone. No, hey Herbert, let's go to you, and then let's go to Kris Ferguson's brought up here too. And I know it's gonna be fun to hear from him. He's also a writer at HBCU Gameday as well as D2Football.com.
Yeah, Kris is the expert. But I'll just say this from covering Bowie State and covering the CIAA. This Virginia Union team has a really good chance of making a deep run in the D2 playoffs. In comparison to Damon Wilson's team that we had last year, there are a lot of similarities, but I think they're built to be able to grind games out. I think Steve mentioned Jada Byers. If he's not a shoo-in for the Harlan Hill Award, I don't know who is, honestly. The guy's been that impressive. And we're talking about HBCU football in general at the D2 level. I mean, we talk a lot about what Virginia Union's done, but, on the other side, in the other conference, in the SIAC, you've got Benedict that is, running undefeated. And, they have really been super impressive. That Region 2 is chock full of HBCU football. And it's a shame because, pretty much all the teams that are there in that region are playoff worthy teams if they were in other regions. So it's going to be interesting to see how, who makes the cut going down the stretch. And, we don't really like talking about Valdosta. They're a bad word to us in HBCU circles, simply because, they've been kind of HBCU killers in the playoffs over the years. And the fact that, Virginia Union really not just beat them, but they did so in a manner that really kind of sent a statement. So, I think, people looking at that Virginia Union team, looking at that Benedict team in SIAC, there's a lot to really look forward to down the stretch. I think both of those squads can have a real impact in the D2 playoffs.
Kris, what are your thoughts? And welcome up.
Good evening, everybody. Virginia Union is just really interesting because they just had a hard time sort of getting over the hump, and the model that they have on offense is something that has been in stone for a while. When you had, like, before Jada Byers, you had Tobias Taylor, who, he also rushed for over 1,500 yards and led Division II in total in all-purpose yards, and most of that was rushing his last year at Virginia Union. And it would have been great to see how that would have played out in 2020 before COVID happened and he went to Notre Dame College. They've kind of always just been kind of there. They just haven't been able to put all the pieces together. And this year feels like for Virginia Union, they finally got those pieces together. And I think the difference between this team, Virginia Union's team, and Bowie State's team is that they're much more well-rounded on offense. And we kind of seen team after team, whether it's a Fayetteville State, whether who has a really good defense, whether it's Bowie, try to force Virginia Union to pass the ball. And what a lot of people are starting to see is Jakari Grant, the quarterback, is actually a very efficient passer. He's leading the conference in efficiency. And so, that just speaks to just how many different weapons that they actually have. What was really interesting about the Valdosta game was they started the game wanting to sort of like be more of a very balanced team. And I think they realized during the game that we could actually run the ball really well. So they switched up the offense and went from more of a spread look to a traditional eye. And they just started running the ball. And I think that just shows how flexible and how many options they have on offense. And that's just something that, like Bowie State, they kind of got to that point later in the season, last season, with Khalil Wilkins and the quarterback. But I think Virginia Union kind of figured it out a little sooner in the year, which was like great to see. So to me, I just think that, I think that they have the opportunity to go pretty far. They're going to certainly have some obstacles, likely Fayetteville State, if they get past this week, round 2, which should be a pretty physical game. And then, the draw in the playoffs is not going to be an easy draw in Super Region 2.
Oh, I so wish I had Ink Sports on here. You know who I'm talking about. That guy loves his figuring out who's on for all of this, the playoffs and predicting who's going to end up where at. While we're kind of talking about, D2 level and okay. I just saw, it's so funny for a moment there, Steven, he's had a little bit of a hiccup with his system. So he kind of vanished and now I see he reappeared. I think I got you back up here. Steven, are you back up?
I am.
Yeah, no problem. I was like, all right, I guess I'm going to keep with D2 since Stephen vanished. One thing I actually wanted to ask you, Stephen, before, and I do want to get back to D2 football, but one of the other kind of ongoing stories that I've paid attention to, I don't think it's like a national story. It's more like my own personal interest because I find scheduling fascinating for teams. Mm-hmm. And Howard has had one of the most strange schedules I've seen in ages because they were like road warriors up until this past weekend. And then they unleashed, their ability on Delaware State at home for homecoming. And, we were talking about homecoming earlier. My goodness, I loved some of the videos that were coming out of Washington for that, ahead of that game. But, they started on the road. They played 3 road games, 2 classics that were far away in Atlanta and New York City. And then, they played at Yale. And then they played Harvard at it was a home game at Audi Field, but, it's across town. If you know DC. So
right.
What do you make of that schedule?
Well, Howard, what can you say about them? Those guys are just different. And they, for the most part, they love it. They're just different, so their philosophy has been, and you kind of seen this in the SWAC where Grambling, used to play a lot of classic games and be on the road a lot and not really play a lot of home games. Grambling typically only gets 4 home games. You have the Bayou Classic, and then they'll play a lot of classics on the road. But Howard, I guess, they were kind of on a, they had maybe the most academic schedule of a non Ivy League school as far as
Harvard and probably Morehouse, Yale, and Harvard back to back.
Yeah. So that's kind of how they've been using their program. Playing those types of games. And Howard, I asked the coach this year because the thing with them is every year they come to media day, they look good, nice looking guys, they're really smart, and they give you this great pocket presentation about what it means to be a Howard man, and and the expectations and all of this stuff. And they play really hard, but they just find ways to lose games. And they just every year they turn into Howard. And so, they've had some close calls. The MEAC SWAC game that was never ending that I was at, which, it wasn't over until like 1:30 in the morning. That was a game where they could have won. They had a close call against Hampton as well. I think the game against Yale was pretty close as well. So they have some potential there. Head coach Larry Scott, as much as I like to kid about Howard, I do like head coach Scott, what he's trying to build with the program. He's been at the FBS level, and he's trying to, turn Howard into a respectable football program. Because most of the 129 plus years they've been there, they kind of haven't been that. They've had spurts here and there, but there's been questions about their commitment to football, the cost and things like that. But he's got some things going. They got a big win against Delaware State last week, and so right now they're tied for first place in the MEAC. This is still early. That was their first game, and they play Norfolk State this week, who only has one win, so they could easily be 2-0, or they could turn back into Howard and be 1-1. You just never know. And so I think the current MEAC that we have, which is only 6 teams, it can kind of make for some quirky situations. So Howard is they got to feel good about how they performed at homecoming. If they go and beat Norfolk, they're gonna have everybody plays everybody in the MEAC. You can't hide from anybody. I believe that South Carolina State does go to them, and then they got to go to North Carolina Central, who's been pretty good this year as well. So we'll see. Howard, the jury is still out right now. They're still Howard, but good win for them, and I think it gave them a lot of confidence after so many close losses.
Sounds like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Howard.
Yeah. It's the program's won 3 conference championships in 100+ years. So they, for all their prestige, they just have not been a football power. But they've had some spurts where they've had some growth, and so we'll see if Coach Scott and his guys can turn it around this year and give South Carolina State a run for their money.
Absolutely. Hey Herbert, what's up?
Yeah, as a native Washingtonian, as grown up in the shadow of Howard, I'm gonna be a little bit less generous. Howard, in my opinion, really hasn't been consistent since Willie Jeffries was there, and we're talking about the late '80s, early '90s type of deal. Now, I think for those folks that are familiar with the program and familiar with some of the challenges that those guys have in terms of recruiting, that kind of goes with the territory. But I think Steve was absolutely right in terms of this year. They had opportunities to win games, and they just didn't capitalize. They played my alma mater, Alabama State, in the first game, Classic, and that was a really even game. They have talent on the roster. They have talent at the skill positions there. It's just a matter of, finding ways to lose, as, Steve so eloquently put it. I think ultimately, though, how that school invests in the program is going to say a lot about its ceiling in terms of its growth. And, right now, that's just kind of hard to say. The jury's out on it.
Absolutely. I wanted to just shift back towards Division II. And this is actually something I remember I wanted to ask in our last conversation, Steve. We didn't get a chance to because it was it was fun, but we ran out of time. But there's been a lot of coaching shifts in the Division II level, in the CIAA and the SEAC. And now that we're kind of midway through the season. By the way, I should take a second and acknowledge Tony Coaxum, coach of Bluefield State, is in the audience. I just want to acknowledge that, and I respect all the work you're doing, getting that program off the ground. There was an article we talked about last time that was on HBCU Gameday about homecoming last year, and it's still one of my favorite articles I've read. But all that said, who of the new head coaches have seemed to have done seem to be doing the best so far, given their, this new season?
I would say the first name that jumps out at you is Sean Gibbs of Fort Valley State. He's a guy, he played in the CIAA back in the 90s. He's a really good running back. And then in the 2000s, he joined the staff at North Carolina Central with Rod Broadway, when he was there. And then he followed, he went with Coach Broadway to Grambling and then came back to North Carolina at A&T. And, he helped them just churn out running backs. Obviously, everybody knows Tariq Cohen. He's the guy that discovered him. He is and coached him up, but also, at one point, I think A&T had the leading rusher in the MEAC for maybe 6 years in a row, and Sean Gibbs was the coach there. So, I know, he, was interested, and he interviewed for quite a few jobs. And at the beginning of the cycle, he still was on the outside looking in. But what happened was Maurice Flowers, Johnson C. Smith alumnus, and decided that once Johnson C. Smith decided that they were going to go a different way, he decided to come home, which created an opening at Fort Valley, and that was Sean Gibbs' chance, and he's gone, and they're having a great season. They're 7-1. They still have a chance at the playoffs. Tough loss to Benedict, who's really playing well. But so his team is right there. I also look at Virginia State. Their head coach Frazier, started out at Bowie State, went over to Prairie View and got them a SWAC championship for the first time in like forever. Was over at North Carolina Central, and then things didn't work out over there. He'd been out of the game doing some assistant coaching, doing some analyst. He was an AD at a school. And Virginia State, another situation where they still had a coach heading into this year, before Reggie Barlow got the call from the XFL. So they're doing well. I think they are they're 4-3 right now. They were rolling until they ran into the Bowie State wall, and then they lost to Chowan. But they were putting their program together very late. And so there's quite a few guys, but those are the guys that of year one who are really standing out, making an impact. And then of course Reginald Ruffin at Tuskegee. He came over from Miles. He turned them into a powerhouse, and he's over there. He said he's only coached 1 year, and so far they're 5-2. They've won 5 games in a row. They are in the driver's seat for the SIAC West, and could very well be in the champion. He could very well be back in the championship game, in his first, and it appears only year at Tuskegee. Their program had, was really good for a couple of years, was competitive, and the D2 playoffs, and made some wins and some runs, and then they had fallen off. And Coach Ruffin has come in and really established himself in his program there at Tuskegee, and now they're looking like the Tuskegee that folks know and have come to love everywhere other than Miles.
Kris, I would be remiss if I didn't ask your thoughts.
I was going to actually throw out 2 other names. The head coach at Lane, I think, is his first year as well. And they're 4-4. They got a win over FCS school from Tennessee State. And the games that they've lost, even though they're 4-4, have been they're not blowouts. They lost 14-0 to Benedict, who's undefeated, and then they lost by like less than 7 points to Pine Bluff. So I mean, they've been a very competitive squad, and I think it would be an injustice not to. I think his name is Byron Brown, if I'm pronouncing that right. And then Kyle Jackson. I mean, for what he's done at Bowie State, given all the transfers out of the program, and trying to figure out, well, what do you really do? How do you get this program up and going when you lose a lot of the coaching staff, and you're basically handed the keys and had to figure it out, and came within overtime to losing the Virginia Union in overtime, but also getting a win against a top 25 school in New Haven. So I think that that's another brand new head coach that definitely deserves some shine, even though a lot of people may look at Bowie State and say, well, they've fallen off. I mean, given the circumstances, I think he's done remarkably well.
it's funny. I know sometimes it's like historically, gosh, I was just thinking earlier today, one of the earliest AMAs, Ask Me Anythings we did on Reddit, they're not quite as, it's kind of funny. Reddit keeps tweaking the site. And if I mean, I'm not saying I would go, Elon Musk on Reddit, but I mean, they need some work back behind the scenes on the site itself. But that we actually had the athletic director, and it was a tough job of Barbara Scotia, and they didn't even have football, but I said, we'd love to chat with you, and he was really up for it. His name was Jonathan Sisk, and he moved on a few years ago. I think he's somewhere in Chicago now, also working as an athletic director. But it just brought to kind of a head the struggle sometimes for some of the more, especially the private HBCUs. I always think of, obviously, Virginia University in Lynchburg. You guys had a great article about them on HBCU Gameday, this year, and kind of the struggle to sort of keep that program going and keep the university going. And it's kind of a tandem fight. What is that struggle like for programs like that? And especially, I think, keeping, I guess, more towards college football, for VUL, what's it like for them? And do you see, does it seem to be working?
Well, VUL, what can we say? Those guys, they've been around. I think their program's been around maybe a little bit over a decade, a little bit longer than I've been doing game day. They've been trying to find the right formula. They started off with Willard Bailey, who's one of the all-time winningest coaches in CIAA history, had a great career at Virginia Union, and won some games at Norfolk State. And he took on the job of trying to build that program. And they had some times where they would be kind of competitive, after being the homecoming fodder and things like that. And I think they are the utilitarian football program for HBCUs. If you win a homecoming game, you're going to call Virginia Union, Virginia Lynchburg. You're going to call, if you need a game, if you're in a game in a pinch and somebody's pulled out on your schedule, VUL, if they're free, they're going to come. I think that there is a place for them in the ecosystem of HBCU football, just because they'll play anybody anywhere, as they said in the article with Skip Foreman. If you guys get a chance to check that out, it was a great article that he had with them. He's had a couple of great articles with them. Just they're not afraid to play anybody, and sometimes you just need warm bodies. However, I don't know if you guys saw, we tweeted the video that the punter they've had some talented players. They have been able to get some talent. Guys, so many people play football or want to play football, and they slip through the cracks. Maybe they're not D1 talent, or maybe they are, and they just have some circumstances or make some decisions that may hurt them. But sometimes they need a place to go, and I think football often, we talk about wins and losses, but also I think it saves a lot of people, or it gives a lot of young men a reason to to do something, to try to do something positive, to stay in school, to just kind of keep them maybe off of the streets. And I think Dean Sanders talked about keep them off of some things that may otherwise impact them, and it gives them something to channel what they do. So they've had some talented players. They've had some talented players. They had a punter. Their punter, man, he punted like almost 100 yards. I don't know if you guys saw that from the HBCU Gameday Twitter account in their game against Southern. And so again, there's always going to be. I think there's always going to be a place for them. They've been able to keep their football program going for all of these years so far. So enough money to survive, to pay a coach. I think their coach actually is the father of, I think his twin sons play at Johnson C. Smith, Coach Newman. And so, I think there's a place for VUL. Some people see them as another member of the CIAA. I think you're much likely to see Coach Coaxum and his school at Bluefield State come back to the CIAA. And from what I'm understanding, that may be sooner rather than later. And so I think VUL kind of, in that space where they don't have a lot of restrictions and NCAA restrictions, I think there's a space for them, and I think they'll continue to keep it going.
I just dropped a quote tweet in our, I guess, the chat for this particular Twitter space of that punt that you shared. That is an amazing punt. I was kind of quietly watching it in the background, and definitely I recommend giving that a look-see.
Yeah, so it's again, there's so many people that want to play college football that have a desire, and they have shown some improvements. So against some of the MEAC teams that they played, they did. I think their loss to Virginia, I'm sorry, Delaware State was maybe 34-19. And there were a couple other games that were closer, and so I think that there's a place for them. But I also think that if you have playoff aspirations, then they're not a team that you should play. So, North Carolina Central is now 5-2 after their loss to South Carolina State, and they need South Carolina to lose twice, and they need to win out to have the chance to go to Celebration Bowl. If not, then their only other hope is the NCAA season, and you just don't know because they beat North Carolina A&T, who may end up being the Big South champion. They also had the win over New Hampshire, which is a top 25 team. But then they also had the D2 game against Winston State, and also the game against VUL, and those are two of their wins. So if you take those off, we don't know how kind the committee will be to that. Florida A&M did play a D2 last year and still managed to get in, but that was one sub FCS opponent. So I think if you're a Division One school in the MEAC that may or in the SWAC that wants to get in the playoffs, you probably don't want to play them. And maybe Kris can tell you about if you're a CIAA team and you play them, like Virginia Union. They played them, but I think it's there's a place for them.
It's the same issue with Division Two, because only Division Two games count for playoffs. So, with the CIAA having a 10-game regular season, Virginia Union in particular, who played VUL to start the year, had to basically run the table to be assured to get in, because otherwise you start having one or two losses and you only have a 10-game schedule, you're really behind the curve. So even those FCS wins that any Division two school may have does not count towards the Division two playoffs. So it's kind of the same thing there. Having a VUL as a filler doesn't do you any favors when it comes to playoff aspirations at the Division two level. I
That makes
did.
sense.
I did
Oh,
want
go
to.
ahead.
I did want to mention. With VUL in particular, I mean, they're one of the rare programs that have had somebody go to the NFL. There was a article on Gameday many years ago about Keith Lewis, who was a defensive back and actually did sign a contract. And I think he did play. I think he played some preseason games in the
Yeah, I remember
NFL.
that vaguely.
Yeah, so I mean, they've had some success despite not being not even being an NCAA team. As to the question about the other private HBCUs, one of the interesting things that I've explained to individuals who follow Division two football is, there's certainly a higher degree of athletes that as a percentage of the student population in the private schools, and it's not just HBCUs; it's also at some of the other private schools as well. But I think the bigger difference is when you start to see a athletic director who's a head coach of a sport as well, and you see that at like St. Augustine's, for example, where the track coach, a longtime track coach, was also the athletic director. Now it's the football coach who's the athletic director, and then Tuskegee has that same issue with Reginald Ruffin as well, who is in that role, although he has said that he's not going to coach football after this year. And they're going to try to find a head coach and separate those roles out. But that is a common issue where you do have an AD who is also a coach, and having that kind of like split attention. It's kind of like being a jack of all trades, master of none type situation that doesn't really benefit. It's cost cutting, and it doesn't really benefit the program as a whole.
That makes sense. It's an interesting situation, and I really, you guys have a lot of good insight on it. One thing I do realize we've gone about an hour, we never mentioned it. I literally not once, but we've got to college football game day. I mean, this is kind of the week, right? I mean, I remember the FAMU show. I remember seeing the rattlesnake hit going on Corso. So, how big of a deal is this? And I know, Steven, you said you're heading down to Jackson. You gotta lay the scene for us.
Oh yeah, I mean this is a huge deal. I am old enough to remember the FAMU situation, but I just don't recall it. So I mean I've known about it for
Dude,
quite
you're
some
making me
time, but
feel so old. I can't believe the way you
no,
phrased
no, no,
that.
no.
I remember
I
that.
was in
I
college.
remember it.
I just don't remember. Like it just I don't know what was going on in my life that I just didn't know. I don't remember it. I don't know. Maybe I was just so engrossed
I
in
was 28, so that's probably the why.
yeah, so I missed it, but no, it's a big deal. I did go to the college football. I did go to college game day last year when it was MEAC SWAC. Obviously, that's in Atlanta. That's a neutral site. They've also had it at the Bayou Classic, I believe, when it was in Houston. So I'm excited to see it in person at a in the city. The campus the vet is not actually on the campus at Jackson State, but it's not far. So I'm excited to see it there. I'm a little bummed. I'm hearing it's going to rain. But
Oh,
definitely.
looks like there we heard. Yeah, I know because I know Belhaven was trying to make they moved their game, I think, to Friday, didn't they? Because they were hoping to maybe get someone from game day to come and see them.
Yeah. So hopefully the rain will hold off or whatever. But anyway, I mean I think it's really huge. Again when I started game day in 2012, one of the things that when I was watching college game day and I was like, man, this would be great. HBCUs don't have really anything like this, and it would be great if we did. And so, to see, you start getting into the weeds and doing the work, and you're like, well, I don't know if this is ever going to happen. So, but that's great. It made a lane for us, but to see it come to fruition and happen now is pretty amazing. Obviously, Deion Sanders and his guys. He's a football unicorn. He was on the field and now as a head coach as well. I mean, you think about it in the last couple weeks they've been on Good Morning America. They've been on 60. He's been on Good Morning America, 60 Minutes, now College Game Day. And so it's just the right. I think it's the right school, the right coach, the right time, and the right atmosphere. I went to my first visit to Jackson was Deion Sanders' first game, Coach Prime's first game against Edward Waters, and we're still coming out of the pandemic. We hadn't had HBCU football since 2019. And so there was just a lot of, it was a little bit of, it wasn't quite what it was. There was a lot of excitement and buzz, but it was kind of like it hadn't really developed yet. And then I went back in December when the SWAC fall championship was there, and it was just electric. It was literally like an FBS game, but the HBCU crowd. I mean, just folks out there, just really large numbers because of the stadium size that the vet has. And they were just, excited about what was going on. And so I imagine that, with all the success they've been having, and they're just coming off homecoming, they had a great crowd there. I'd imagine it would be the same thing. So I think, in my humble opinion, I think College Game Day couldn't have picked a better HBCU at a better time right now than to highlight Jackson State and what they're doing, as well as it's a great rivalry game. A lot of people know Southern plays Grambling in the Bayou Classic, and that's their in-state rival, and it's kind of a friendly buddy rivalry. But from what I picked up from my friends from Southern, and now on the Jackson State side, this one isn't as friendly. This one isn't quite as friendly. It's not as buddy. This is a game that two schools who have large, fat, proud fan bases, really great bands, and great football tradition. Both of them have, multiple Pro Football Hall of Famers, and there's so much tradition, so many great coaches, and always on a lot of people's
Oh,
calendar,
looks like
whether it's for band or for football or for all of the above. And now, you have that, and you throw in what happened last year when they played in Baton Rouge, a game that went down to the wire. Shedeur Sanders, as a freshman, coming down and winning the game in dramatic fashion. His dad on the sidelines. There's so many different storylines and plot lines that it's a really compelling game. I think they chose correctly, especially with JSU continuing to win. I think Southern is a worthy opponent, and I expect it to be a real gritty game, and so I'm really looking forward to it. I think I think the country is in for a treat. Hopefully, they flexed it from ESPN 3 to ESPN something with a connection, because I heard that was pretty bad.
I was hoping that, because I think it's still on ESPN3. I was kind of, that's like my only knock, is that it hasn't. I'm not sure if it's been moved to a little more widely available station. But I got to ask you, I'm not asking you to put on a mascot hat, but who you think has got the edge in this one? Oh. Hey, Kris, I think we lost Steven there again. What are your thoughts?
I was going to go with Jackson State in this one. And, Southern certainly has a very formidable defense, I think, to slow Jackson State down. And I think, Campbell kind of laid a bit of a game plan on how to slow JSU down, because JSU was able to march down the field, but then they would just get so bogged down as you got into the red zone and had to settle for field goals. So I think Southern may be able to do a little bit of the same thing, but at the same time, JSU is kind of they seem to be a little patient, and if you just let the door open just a little bit, they're able to kind of squeak through. So I think Jackson State has a little bit of an advantage going into that game.
One of the fascinating things, one of the stories that caught my attention in all of this, because we were in August when we had our Stephen came on for the first show we had on HBCU Gameday, and just kind of the scene that we asked about Dion and the effect he's had on HBCU sports, and that's prior to how this season's worked out. Because now being undefeated so far, bringing college football game day, it's hard to. I don't think it can be overstated at this point. I mean, and I'm not trying to put words, but I mean it's striking to me as someone who's a massive fan of college football and has been following all the levels at every time. But the story that really fascinated me is Jackson, the city, is like trying to apparently redo the stadium or build a new one, and that's been a topic that I know. Because obviously the city of Jackson's been having, some serious, infrastructure issues that they need to address, like a lot of major American cities. And there's a whole, I don't want to undercut that. But while we see if Stephen, I know he's trying to probably come back on, but Kris, I've got you up here. I'd love to ask you actually a different topic. So one of the schools that said they were going to add college football and then kind of backed off a little bit was Talladega. And they used to have football back in the day. Do we know where they're at there and their process? Because I know they're NAIA, they're not D2, and I know that's your speciality. But I know their goal was, at least at one point, to eventually kind of work their way back into D2. Where are they in that process?
It's been pretty quiet over there, honestly, and I think it's still sort of in feasibility study, because football is such an expensive sport relative to all the others, and there's a reason why you do have some HBCUs who just don't sponsor it, because it's just so expensive. And I think it's probably wise that they really think about and take their time with it, because we've just seen a number of HBCUs who have attempted to do football and it not really work out in a spectacular way. I mean, whether you talk about Morris Brown and their debacles at the Division I level. Stillman is a really good example, who had actually a pretty decent football team. And not only did they drop the football team, but they also dropped down to NAIA. Payne is another good example, who brought football back, and I don't think it lasted 2 years, and then they dropped it again. So because it was just so expensive. So I think it's wise for them to continue to think about it, if that's the direction they want to go in, but really consider, the financial implications, because it is a very expensive sport.
Absolutely. I remember paying, that they were really only there briefly. And exactly. I think that's one of the big difficulties. And that's why, so many programs, it's much easier to field a basketball team, not because, just because there's fewer players, there's less equipment. And that's why you see a lot of, the way it's funny, with, again, I have lots of respect for what they're trying to do at VUL, but the way I first came across them was back in like 2015. I was doing some research on some of the teams that were kind of not really colleges, and they've always been in existence, but it was a football team that had existed, and they're no longer around. And, it was like quasi online classes, but it was really a team, and it was unusual for football. But of course, in hoops, you see that a good deal. You see that a good amount because it's so easy to field a team versus, a football program. And teams are trying to fill spots. I get it. I mean, especially if you're a football team or a college basketball team, you want to get home games, sometimes outside of conference, and people don't realize the value of conference play. The value of being in a conference is having all those guaranteed games. And absolutely, you see, I'm always impressed by that, the hustle of some of these athletic directors to fill, and coaches, obviously coaches are a huge part of it, to fill those schedules and build those programs out to all of that.
Yeah, I kind of want to talk on that a little bit because the conference issue is, and I know Coach Coaxum is feeling the burden of that being a Division II independent. Um, the conference issue and is really huge, and the CIAA is a really good example of that. Before this year, they played 3 out of conference games and 7 conference games, and the issues that coaches and athletic staffs have had to try to fill schedules to fill 3 non-conference games had been so much that the has so much of a burden that the conference moved to an 8 game conference schedule and 2 out of conference games. And even then, you still had issues where you had a couple of teams that played out of conference this particular year. In one of those 2 out of conference slots, there were in conference opponents, so they just didn't count for conference play. Um, but that's the thing is that when you have a situation where individuals are trying to find a um, they're trying to find games. It can be a bit of a struggle, and even there are teams that are they really a victim of their own success. We've seen. I actually made a tweet earlier today. I was kind of pondering, well, what teams have the CIAA played in recent years, and the range of schools that they're playing now is much wider than it probably has been in a very long time. We kind of saw like Bowie State played McKendree, which is in Illinois, Chowan, and I think Bowie State actually traveled out there in a home and home game. Saginaw Valley State and Bowie State were in a home and home. Before the pandemic, Bowie State was actually going to travel to Texas A&M Commerce, who was still in Division II at the time, and play because they couldn't find anybody. The Great Lakes, where Grand Valley and Ferris State is, they've actually reached out and Wayne State scheduled a game. So with Shaw. So I mean, there's just so many games that these schools are having to find ways to fill in that schedule that the value of conference play is just so big. It's such a big deal.
Coach Coaxum, I know you came up here. We'd love to hear from your thoughts.
Hey guys, I appreciate you guys having me on, and always thank you for the constant positive support and feedback you give our program. Definitely know exactly what you guys are talking about because we're living that life right now, and kind of twofold things I want to speak on it. Is that obviously you guys are hitting the nail on the head of exactly how expensive the sport is, and it's hard to maintain it, to get it going. The things that are vital is just having the type of president that we have that is fully behind and, is leading the charge behind getting the program. You have to have that support because, again, it's very expensive and it takes everybody in the institution to to really be behind it to get things going, because there's a lot of moving parts to it. And we've had that support in 2 years, and you did a great job of setting us up to where we can come in, because again, you're building these programs. Usually, it takes 3 years before you're even getting to play games, and I know even in that extent, you're in a position where you're struggling to be competitive, because you've been a pretty young group and trying to build it, and we got ours up and running in 8 months. And they gave us great support in order to do that, and the guys were very excited about it. And obviously we were able to win some ball games the last 2 years. But the scheduling piece has been a bear. Trying to work around everyone else getting their conference games in, and finding holes in it, and where you can slide in and fit in. And it's been a kind of a worldwide thing for us. And then there's some some hiccups to that. In each of the last 2 years, we've had a game get canceled on us, due to various reasons. And you never want to do that, and it's tough. And we have a school coming all the way from California to play us this year. So the bottom line is it takes a lot to be involved with it. It takes a lot of support on it. And that's why we're excited about the opportunity of hopefully getting that acceptance in the CIAA, because it's a really perfect fit for us. Regional wise, again, we're only about 2.5 hours from Charlotte. So particularly all the schools on the south side of the conference, I think the farthest trip would be maybe 4 hours, something like that. It fits in perfectly there. And, we were in CIA many, many years ago when the program was originally going. And just that ability to compete and have your guys be able to compete for, national accolades and conference, accolades, and obviously as a program compete for championships. And so we're hopefully we'll get that nod here very soon, and that'll definitely help us in building our schedules. So we don't have to worry about, like I said, those 10 games, and now just be able to worry about the first couple that start the year. So again, thank you guys for always welcoming us into these conversations, and continue to give us the positive pub. And I really appreciate you guys. Go Big Blue.
Thank you for joining us, Coach. We really appreciate that. That was some great insight on all of that. I mean, it's one of those things where I think a lot of fans don't appreciate the behind the scenes, especially at a program like Bluefield State, trying to put together the program as an independent, and how it isn't just sort of handed out to them, like it is on the, especially when you're in a conference or in like the FBS level, and maybe at a program where people are just banging down the door because they they want to play over there.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like I said, it's the even as long as I've been in the sport and the profession, I got a greater appreciation of everything that everyone does. Again, starting things from scratch. I had to order all the equipment, design the uniforms. We designed our mascot and logo, and just the things that you go in it that had a greater appreciation than I already did for equipment managers. Because especially that first year, I was going through stuff, and I'm like, oh snap, I forgot to order, mouthpieces. These certain little things that is mandatory that you need, and you solely forget because in the normal coaching cycles, you don't think about those things. They show up, and it's a testament to the staff that I have around me are very detailed guys, and certain guys, hey coach, did you order these? And I'm like, nope, I'm gonna call and get an order right now. So again, it's a lot of ins and outs, but I think it also has allowed myself and our staff to really understand everything that goes involved with it. And when it comes to the actual football stuff and the things outside of it, because again, we're dealing with a institution that hadn't had football in 40 years, and we were literally the subject matter experts. So being able to teach them how to do certain things, and I just think that it makes us better coaches, and outside of coaching, make us better advocates for our student athletes that we're bringing in, because now we can speak much deeper on a lot of different things that a lot of coaches never really worry about and talk about. So we can talk real deeply in it, and give our young people and their families a better understanding of what they're getting into, not only on the field, but more importantly off the field, which is our ultimate goal, is to get in our case, get these young men to get their degrees and then go on to be productive citizens and leaders across the country and the world.
Kris, I know you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I just want to mention, the Division II landscape is particularly not very, it's particularly brutal when you're a Division II independent. And we've seen that issue with like USC Pembroke, who struggled to field games, and then they ended up getting into an alliance with the South Atlantic for a couple of years to try to get games on their schedule before joining the Mountain East, which is a conference that is mostly West Virginia and Ohio schools and one school in Maryland. With none of those schools being anywhere close to them, and with USC Pembroke not they're there for just football because they have their own home for all of their other sports, and they had to go to that length just to get games on the schedule. And in the case of Bluefield, the issue that they kind of ran into is the Mountain East only plays one out of conference game. The PSAC, the Pennsylvania Conference, only plays one out of conference game. The CIAA plays two out of conference games. The South Atlantic plays, I think, two or three out of conference games, and they've actually had teams join their conference this year. So the landscape for a Division II independent trying to get games on the schedule is very, very rough after, I would say, the first three games of the season, which is kind of what I think Coach Coaxum was kind of discussing earlier when he and his staff are having to go, to great lengths just to put together a schedule that's more than 5 games.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense. Coach, while you're up here, I have one more follow-up that I wanted to just sort of ask. How do you sell the program to prospective recruits? Because that's always an interesting perspective, because every coach has their own touch, and you have a very interesting situation and a very unique one. So what do you do to sell recruits out there to come join your program?
Yeah, it's a good question. I try to stay away from the word sell, just because just by doing that could lead you down a path of trying to convince. And my thing is, I don't try to convince kids of to come play for us. I talk about what we're about, what our focus is, and what we're trying to do. And our number one thing is to give these young men another avenue to, one, go play the game they love beyond high school, and more importantly, get their education and to go on to be the best husbands, fathers, and leaders they can be. And we talk about how we go about doing that. As for our particular program, it's all about the things that we talked about is being part of something special and unique. We lean pretty heavily on the fact that, hey, we're pretty confident that this is the only program that you're talking to that you get to say it truly get to be yours. You'll be the first ones to, wear these uniforms, the first ones to, be in our new dorms and be in our new locker room, to set records and basically be able to, set the foundation and be like, yep, this is literally my program. You're not walking into someone else's traditions and history and legacy. You get to be that history and legacy. And 20 years from now, 25 years, you come back, and they're honoring the 2021 team, and they're rolling my old butt out there in my walker or my wheelchair, and say, hey, this is the program. These are the young men that took a leap of faith to bring this program back, and now look what's here. Now what's built. He said, your names are going to be in the history books, in the record books. You're going to be the ones that people are talking about. And that's what we lean heavily on. And our thing is, our recruiting process is different. We don't try to back kids in the corner and say, hey, we're offering you got 2 weeks to let us know something. It's, hey, it's an informational piece where we pride ourselves on being a very straightforward and honest program, and not honest is the word I'm looking for, but straight laced and letting them know what we're preparing you for. We're not going to sit there and tell you how great you are, because again, if you weren't a very good football player, we wouldn't be talking to you anyway. So it's for you to get to know us to get to know you, and do you want to be a part of what we're building and where we want to lead you? And that way, every kid's going to come in with a certain thing in their mindset. They know they're going to get coached hard, but they also know they're going to get. We're going to care about them. We're going to love on them, and it's going to be a family thing, a brotherhood, because that's what I get from my time as being an Army football player and the brotherhood that I have with them. And I try to bring that to our guys. Say, hey, we're truly a family, and you're going to be inviting these guys to be your wedding. You're going to be reaching out to your coaches to tell us about your things. It's a lifetime bond, and it's even for the guys that decided to leave. There are guys that left our program last year, but they still know they can call me, text me, or any of our coaches if they need something. And I think that's what we do. I think we just do that differently than most people, and I think that resonated with a lot of kids, and they want to be a part of something special like that.
Wow, sign me up. If you need a out of shape 43-year-old attorney to go, I don't know, be a tackle dummy, sign me up.
I got to check your grade first. First.
Yeah.
You're a lawyer, so you're probably pretty good.
Oh my goodness. Stephen, by the way, I apologize. Have you been able to come back up? We lost you for a bit there, so we got a little sidetracked there. Are you still up?
Yeah, I hope I'm in a more stable place now. So
No
hopefully
problem.
that'll help. Well, you guys can hear me well?
Yes, we can. As we kind of head into this weekend, Stephen, I'm trying to actually remember. I think the last question I was trying to ask you before you kind of vanished there was, what was your call for this weekend's game in Jackson? Or actually, was it that, or were we talking about the stadium? I think I was actually asking what your thoughts were on Jackson. They're suddenly thinking about improve. I can't remember if they're improving or replacing the stadium, all because of how good things are going at Jackson State.
Well, yeah. So the talk for years at Jackson State has been about getting a stadium, smaller stadium, still a good size for FCS, but getting one of those on of JSU's own. They operate the vet, but it's a little bit different there, and so that's been something they've been trying to push for a while. It's gotten certain places in the in the state legislature, and unfortunately, it's died for Jackson State. Just earlier this year, they voted it down, and then and then a couple weeks ago, when the Brett Favre fiasco reared its head up again, the governor Tate Reeves kind of dogpiled in an attempt to deflect from what was going on with at USM, tried to dogpile on top of Jackson State, talking about he doesn't support them having a stadium for the same reason that he wouldn't support the public doing their own stadium. So there's a lot of Mississippi politics that are involved with it as well.
Mm-hmm.
But the city of Jackson, they support a resolution supporting it, but obviously the powers that be in the state house have a much larger say. And I think it's really just a gesture of them showing that they really appreciate what Coach Prime has done, shining a spotlight on the program and the entire city. So yeah, that's kind of the long and short of it.
That makes a lot of sense. It's so funny too. I don't even want to make it sound like that's something that Jackson State, being an FCS program, a solid program right now, but not one that's the cachet of Ole Miss or Southern Miss or Mississippi State. But at the same time, I mean, from my own personal experience being an alum of University of Southern California, the LA Coliseum everyone was always asking, like, why is the LA Coliseum kind of sort of behind the other Pac-12 programs? And it was for many years. And it's because the same thing. It was a government-owned stadium, and they had this weird space where the governor, it had like a board of 9 people. 3 were from the city, 3 were from the county, and 3 were from the state. So eventually they ran it into the ground so far that the state or all 3 of them cut a deal beyond their board members and just said, USC, you get the master lease. And that was only it was basically right before they renovated the Coliseum. That's basically why they were able to even get the Olympics again, is because suddenly that, from what I understand there, it was like the politics where we're just going to do the basic amount of maintenance on the LA Coliseum and hope an NFL team will move in. And then, of course, the NFL comes and then builds a brand new stadium, which is, welcome to the NFL, right? They're about to compete with college football in every day of the week, it sounds like. So, it's a mercenary business over there. That's all I got to say about that. But gosh, guys, it's been 90 minutes, so I don't want to keep you guys forever. But I do want to hear, obviously the big game this weekend undoubtedly is Southern at Jackson State. That's just, it's college football game day. Everyone's looking forward to seeing what that's going to be like. I'm going to be tuning in the morning. I know most of, the college football universe will be, just to see how exciting that's going to be and the hype that's behind it. And, but what other games this weekend have got you too interested, or any of you interested? I mean, Coach, if you want to chime in, I know, have a little bit of bias there, but which games are you excited about heading into this weekend?
I would start off with Virginia Union and Chowan because Chowan has one division loss or one conference loss, and Virginia Union is undefeated. So the winner, if Virginia Union wins that game, then they are the Northern Division champions and are going to the CIAA championship game. So that one is such a huge game. Now, if Chowan wins, then it gets really interesting the following week with Virginia State, Virginia Union. So there's a lot to settle this weekend in the Northern Division in the CIAA, and that's the game I'm watching.
I was gonna say, yeah, for me, obviously, I mean, I'll be at Jackson Southern. It's as I was saying, I think I kind of talked for so long I didn't even know that I wasn't on anymore. But yeah, that's always Jackson State and Southern. They're a rivalry that unless you're within HBCU sports and even really more so within the SWAC, you may not really understand that type of rivalry. Everyone knows that Southern plays Grambling at the Bayou Classic, and that's kind of like a friendly, brotherly, like family type rivalry, sibling rivalry, and it's like Jackson State's like the guy across the street that they really don't like. And so that game is always very physical, very competitive, not only with the football but also with the bands as well. So there's so much, and then you add in Coach Prime, Deion Sanders, and the attention that Jackson State has gotten, and College Game Day being there, and it's just it set the stage for a really epic game. And then you think about the game they had last year in Baton Rouge. I think all of those things have everyone, hoping that this will be a game that, lives up to the hype. I'm sure both coaches want to make sure that there's a lot of space between them, but as someone that'll be there at the game, you hope for some good football, some solid competition, and an exciting finish. So we'll see. But the last time, you never really know with Jackson State. You thought when they played FAMU, it would be a tight game, and I mean they came and blew them out of the water. And then they're playing Alabama State team, and nobody they had a couple wins, but nobody was expecting them to give them a run for their money, and then and then it's a tight game. Tennessee State is another game that was a little bit tighter than people thought as well. So Jackson State, you don't really know if they play a complete game. I think they're really going to be hard to beat. But if they get spotty and sloppy with the ball, I think it could be a very interesting evening. But I'm going to go afternoon. But I'm going to go ahead and pick Jackson since I'll be in Jackson with no security.
Yeah, that's a safe bet. Coach, what game are you going to be watching this weekend?
Definitely will get my eyes on the like everyone else, the Jackson State and FAM game. Definitely want to check that out. And across the board, there's a lot of great football out there. Seeing Virginia Union play. I have a good friend. My good friend is the OC there, and Mike Morita. So I'm very happy for him and what he's doing, and watching that guy, the Byers kid, just play ball is phenomenal. But I'm gonna try to catch a little bit of everything. But obviously, want to see that game in the college game day environment. Obviously, it's great for HBCU football. So that'll probably be the number one on the list when it comes to our HBCU world. And obviously, on another end, I'm always keep an eye on my Black Knights Army. So that's just my personal thing there. But in what we're talking about, I definitely will be checking out that HBCU, getting the shine that it deserves on a national stage in College Game Day. I think that's going to be fantastic.
Absolutely. Coach, I had one of our team that runs our CFB. He is a West Point grad. So I told him,
okay.
like, oh my gosh, we got somebody who played for them. And he's almost a little older than you are. He's the oldest of us all. He fought in Gulf War I. So,
What's his name?
Oh my gosh. I kind of, some of our guys don't like to necessarily throw them out there publicly, but I'll send you a DM with his info. For sure. Yeah. But I do. I mean, some of us do, some of us don't. It's always kind of like, go as you wish.
Yep.
It's so funny. Speaking of Road Warriors, I mean, because you guys are hosting Lincoln, as your regular season finale. Yep. And that's a team that's been going ever, because I live here in the Twin Cities, which is always a disappointment because I want to go to an HBCU game, but not a whole lot in Minnesota. Right. But they came out to play St. Thomas, which is one of those teams that kind of, they have their own funny story about having to jump from D3 to non-scholarship FCS. But that's a fascinating program. How does that kind of a schedule come together? Because I'm really curious to hear from folks like yourself who've been working with them, because they're being really, I mean, and the hustle. I mean, they're being really aggressive about playing all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of reached out to us, when we were planning, trying to get the schedule together back in early January. And, when we got it, I heard of Lincoln. I was like, Lincoln, I said, I don't think they're open right now. And because obviously I was thinking, Lincoln and PA, just off the top of my head.
Yeah.
And then we started talking to them, and, it's kind of things like, hey, we want to come out and try to, get it going. And, we're helping them cover some of that stuff to get them out there to play, because we both wanted to get a game on, and they're a young program. And I believe every one of their games has been on the road. Very talented group. They got guys that have played. They got some guys that were at FBS level schools, so they got some guys that are talented. So it's definitely be a challenge for our guys to play a really good team that has some talent. Again, the record doesn't show it, but they got some talent there, and we're going to need to play our best game of the year. And we got our butts kicked last week, handedly. One of those games where everything that could go wrong went wrong, and made mistakes, and Allen capitalized on everything that we screwed up on. And even though we caught some turnovers ourselves, we weren't able to capitalize. But the great thing about my group of kids, man, we had a great week. This probably had our best week of practice this week. We came back, we licked our wounds on the bus ride back, and got back to work on Tuesday. And, we had a great week. And, that's what you love to see, particularly from a bunch of kids that are freshmen and sophomores. And with that game and season finale, and we have 3 seniors, so it'll be cool to have my first senior day for those guys who jumped on board, from the get-go. So I'm excited about that, and that'll be a special moment for myself and as well as them, to show our gratitude for those 3 young men who decided to jump on this journey. So, but yeah, it's gonna be fun next week, and I get to enjoy the games. And bye weeks are always rough, just because you enjoy that time away a little bit, but combined with not playing the way we know we can play last week, and just once the Saturdays roll around and everyone else is playing, you wish you were out there and you get your juices going. So I'm excited for my guys. I know we'll be ready to come back, get back to work this week, and try to end this second season out. We get this one, that'll put us at 5-3. And that'll be 9 wins in 2 years, in the first 2 years of a brand new program with a very young team. So that's something we're really striving towards, and we think we'll be pretty proud of.
That would be something exceptional. I mean, I've enjoyed this. I mean, listening to you and following the team and the program, and best of luck to you. Obviously it's a bye week, so I hope you have a great relaxing weekend and some great practice in between. But thanks for joining us, Coach.
Thank you, man. I appreciate it. And just so you know, I'll let you know right now, you have a free pass to come on down next year to any game you want. So come on out and check us out.
Absolutely. Well, you know what, guys, it's been over, oh my gosh, we're almost at an hour and 45. So I'm going to slowly wrap this up, but I want to give everyone an opportunity to just kind of let our audience know where they can find you. I guess, Kris, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so you can find me in various places. So here on Twitter at D2Ferg. Also, I do a weekly column that covers the upcoming games on D2Football.com. and then I also do like intermittent articles on HBCU Gameday as well.
And Steven, you are the whole reason we organized this to begin with. I'd love tell everyone where to find you and your work and all of that.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I'm with the compliment, but yeah, just wanted to so you can follow me, of course, on this account at Stephen J. Gaither. That's my personal account, and then also, of course, at HBCU Gameday on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Most importantly, HBCUGameday.com, where you can read all our articles and watch our visual content. We've also added a scoreboard recently, so I'm really excited about that, which has all the stats, so you can literally get everything that you need from HBCUGameday.com. I'm really excited about that, as well as some of the other things we're doing on Friday nights at 7 Eastern. You can catch our show, the No Huddle. We'll preview, we'll look ahead to this week in Black College football. It's presented by Nissan, so again, big shout out to them, and I appreciate everybody that's ever clicked on the story and continue to do so we keep doing this and do it at an even higher level. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and for all of you out there, HBCU Gameday has been one of my go-to sites. Gosh, since probably 2015 or so, when I started really getting into, well, I started helping with this account in 2013. That's how I learned how Twitter worked. But it's something that I always found valuable, and the Twitter account and the website especially, and obviously Steven's own account has been extremely valuable to me. All of that said, on behalf of myself, Bob Ekayeri, on behalf of my guest, Stephen J. Gaither, the founder and head of HBCUGameday.com, on behalf of Kris, on behalf of Herbert, who joined us earlier, on behalf of Coach Coaxum, all of you who've listened, we really appreciate it. And thank you for supporting all of us in all of this. I just wanted to say how much we value you. So on that note, I'll hang up and listen.